Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. It's a Monday, so you know it's Ethan here once again at the GSMC giving you some college football news, noteworthy things going on, and you know, sometimes I give you my opinions on some things. So once again, it's a brand new week into this college football carousel of dealing with COVID-19 and also dealing with students coming back on campus and also dealing with what exactly are we going to do with the players and how are we going to proceed with 6 out of the 10, top college football conferences are still continuing to fight on and try and have a season, while others are also dealing with the backlash from parents, players, some media members, some, athletic directors, whatever the case you want to say. There are people that are dealing with a lot of hot water because of cancelizations and postponements of certain seasons. And the Big Ten is seeing a whole lot of hot water because of things like that, let alone other places as well. But the Big Ten is the big story going on right now, as we've seen parents trying to protest, and we've seen people who are deeply connected within college football talk about why they feel like they have been slighted by the Big Ten. And the Big Ten commissioner had to come out and speak his piece. So Mr. Kevin Warren, commissioner of the Big Ten, explains the decision to cancel fall sports in a letter over the past week in response to all this criticism about why he canceled the season from players and parents, coaches, and fans. So the more pertinent sentence for anybody clinging to a thin hope that the season and the league would change its mind and play football this fall, the vote by the Big Ten Council of Presidents and Chancellors was overwhelmingly in support of postponing fall sports and will not be revisited. And that should probably be the end of it all. And that's what he came in and said. He's quoted saying, "I could have done a better job last week articulating the numerous concerns and risks, and that's why he wants to put things in writing. And it's been an incredibly difficult decision, and a lot of the disappointment comes from passion. And he knows that they have passionate athletes, parents, and 14 passionate fan bases." He's quoted saying, I am doing everything I can focus on for the future so our student athletes can have a rewarding Big Ten experience in the winter and spring." So that is pretty significant because multiple league sources told SI, who reported this Wednesday, that the consensus is building towards a winter football season starting in early January and ending in late February, utilizing indoor stadiums around the Big Ten footprint. And SI's Albert Breer was the first to really bring out that information, so shout out to him. But Warren's letter listed a bullet points he called the primary factors, in which there are 6 of them, and what ended up being the big key moments for Big Ten's decision. And here are some of the actual bullet points here. So bullet point number 1 was the transmission rates continue to rise at an alarming rate with little indication from medical experts that our campuses, communities, and country would gain control of the spread of the virus prior to the start of competition. And as our teams were ramping up for more intense practices, many of our medical staffs did not think the interventions we had planned would be adequate to decrease the potential spread, even with our very regular testing. And as the student or the general student body comes back to campus, spread to student athletes would reintroduce infection into the athletics community. So that's the big thing here for me, is that also they're going to talk about contact tracing. But I remember early on throughout this coronavirus pandemic, the biggest thing being parroted around among medical professionals, among bigwig, councilmen, around senators, around politicians, and everybody else involved, flattening the curve. And that was such a big push. That's why people were staying home. That's why people were out of work. That's why everything was going on in March and April and even into May in some areas was the attempt to flatten the curve, make sure that you're doing your part to do that, so that way we can get some sort of control of what's going on. And unfortunately, within that time span, while trying to flatten the curve, when we reached a point to where it was starting to really, flatten, we tried to jumpstart the economy as a country, and thus we moved a bit too fast, in my opinion. And now we are seeing case numbers rise up in certain areas and around the country in general. Cases have been going up, and the attempt to flatten the curve has seemed to just dissipate. I haven't heard it said in a very long time, and I think the ideology of flattening the curve is a lost cause when there is no support to back that sort of petition, that sort of strategy. When you have people still having to go to work, people are still out of work, people are going out, we have places that are opening like restaurants and bars and clubs and things like that, and people can't sit still. And I think it's just a part of the human psyche. Like, it's too hard to sit still, especially when, people who make big time decisions aren't really making decisions to really stop people from doing it. So there's been arguments about whether or not people should have to wear masks or not. To that point on, it kind of left the building. So it's understandable that the first bullet point is talking about transmission rates, because there is no way to stop it if we don't attempt to stop it ourselves. So bullet point number 2 is there's simply too much we don't know about the virus, recovery from infection, and longer term effects. So while the data on cardiomyopathy is preliminary and incomplete, the uncertain risk was unacceptable at this time. So I don't know if you guys heard about the story. It's pretty big locally here in Georgia, but in Georgia State, of course, their quarterback, Michael Colasurdo, he announced Thursday that he won't be able to play in 2020 due to a heart condition as resulting of contracting COVID-19. The quarterback is an incoming freshman at Georgia State in 2020, and the 3-star recruit has been on the Panthers campus since spring, and he was diagnosed with a heart condition as a result to his COVID-19 infection. He tweeted on Thursday that unfortunately this means that he will not be able to play this football season, and he's incredibly thankful for Coach Elliott and the trainer Bob for providing a safe environment for his teammates and himself to train and practice. He added that he expects to be on the field in the 2021 season. So Georgia State is in the Sun Belt Conference and has opted to continue to play in 2020 despite of the crisis. And Sun Belt member Appalachian State suspended all football activities on August 18th after 11 members of the program tested positive recently. So heart conditions and complications related to COVID-19 have become a significant health concern for college football in 2020, and it could be a real danger to people playing sports at this time and people who see themselves as high-touted, high-class athletes. And it's getting bad. So one Power 5 team doctor who is privy to college or to conference commissioner calls says the heart condition is the primary topic during discussions and that they discuss it in every call. So Georgia State is slated to open in the season in September 19th against Louisiana Lafayette, but without, a quarterback that could have used some growth for this season. So preliminary health concerns and things that we don't know about the virus are going to be very, very interesting on how things come about, right? Like, we don't know too much about this virus, unfortunately, and it's going to keep affecting what happens throughout this season, and not just for college football, but also to the NFL. Like, we understand that the NBA hasn't had these issues because they are in a closed off area. We talk about it all the time. We don't have to keep mentioning it, but at the same time, we do have to keep congratulating the NBA for figuring out a way to at least temporarily mitigating the problem of having COVID-19 affect their brand of, sport, their basketball. And yeah, no fans, but the crowd noise seems to be working fine for them. Of course, their player size is a big factor involved in all of that in the first place, but that's going through semantics right now. Just at first it was thought it wasn't even possible. So it's going well and better than anybody ever anticipated. So for college football, which we'll talk about a little bit later about UNC and what they're trying to accomplish right now, there's so many different stipulations on why this might be an issue of creating a bubble. And the thing about it, when you're just going in guns blazing with athletes, one, that you don't really compensate at all. Two, they are in an environment where, after football practice, after going to class or doing online classes, you really have no control on what they do, and they have no incentive besides being able to play, right? That's the only incentive, being able to play. They are basically underneath their own free will. They can do whatever they want. And a lot of college football players have showcased that they have discipline, that they want to play, and that they're not going to compromise the ability to play this season just because they want to go out. But that doesn't stop, everybody from stopping doing it. And if they're in an environment, which most college football players are currently in, an environment where they're around others who decide to not do smart things, and they're around a lot of youth, and youth makes bad decisions. Young people make bad decisions. It's a part of life. It's a part of growing up. It's going to be tough. So the fact of the matter is, the spread is going to continue to happen if there's no real action taken towards limiting the spread. And if the spread keeps happening, people are going to get infected. And we just don't know what's going to happen to people, because we know that people can recover from the virus, but we don't know what recovery actually means. Like, of course, we know that means the virus is no longer in you, right? You don't test positive for it, but that doesn't mean the effects. We don't know what it's done to you yet, and on a larger, less preliminary scale. So that can be really damaging to certain players. And we already seen some really unfortunate news coming out of different places within the college sphere about different former players or players who play at a high level, unfortunately passing away due to unknown heart conditions. And COVID-19 was something that they had at a certain point in time. So it's a very big concern within athletics in general, but especially in college sports, where it's not like these players are doing this because they want to get paid right now, right? They're not getting a check for playing. This is not a situation where they can get hazard pay, or this is not a situation where they're in a contract and they're in a players union and they can negotiate on the risk and the reward factor of this whole thing. They're just kind of stuck here. Either their commissioners say they're not playing and they cancel or postpone the season, or they are going to play. And of course they can choose to opt out. There's always that choice to opt out. They've given them the choice, but at the same time, it's a hard decision, and it's a decision that a lot of people are trying to weigh the pros and cons for, because at this point, when we look at it, college football is in a dire situation that if they can't play the season, they might face some real financial pain, like some real financial problems coming up. And that's because, college football doesn't save money. College football spends and spends and spends on things, and no one really predicted this would ever happen in their lifetime, let alone ever, right? So, of course, epidemiologists have, like, there's been studies on why this isn't something that should be as surprising as it is. But at the same time, what's been transpiring around the globe and around in our country and how we've handled it is pretty surprising to a lot of people, and to myself included. But we're going to continue on this discussion after the break, as we still have a few more bullet points to hit, and we'll move forward with the podcast from there. So keep locking in with GSMC. We'll be right back. And coming after the break, we'll be talking about college football. So GSMC.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we're back here, GSMC College Football, and we were continuing on the discussion about why Big Ten Commissioner decided to go ahead and do what he did, and he has some bullet points here for us. We got through the first two. We're about to finish out Kevin Warren's letter. Here we go. So he said that there were concerns surrounding contact tracing that still exist, including the inability to socially distance in contact sports, pursuant to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention guidelines, and while risk mitigation processes, IG, physically distancing, face coverings, proper hygiene, etc., can be implemented across campus for the student body population, it became clear that those processes could not be fully implemented in contact sports. So, I felt like this one was pretty self-explanatory, and a lot of people, this was talked about early on, just like how everything else was talked about early on. All these concerns are still the same concerns we talked about in early April, in early May. And then they kind of just dissipated over a few as people just started to get excited and seeing how people were trying to move forward with college football. And we kind of left these concerns at the table that never really dissipated. And, I think a lot of the heat cooled off during, June, late May, and really picked back up mid-July was because of the fact of the matter is football as a sport did not have to make any rash decisions early on because their season started in September. So everybody figured that, okay, if we do what we're supposed to do, right, with the virus and how to handle it, we possibly could have football in September, and that football is at a advantage because they have all this time to prep and ready themselves for what potentially could happen with this virus and how they're going to move forward with their sport during this pandemic. And I'm sure they had plenty of meetings. I'm sure they talked to plenty of officials, and I'm sure they talked to plenty of medical experts, epidemiologists, and the like. The fact of the matter is, it feels like and it looks like there really wasn't anything done for majority of that time, or anything that could have been done. And it looked like it was just a big stall point. Everything stalled. There wasn't a lot of things coming out at the time back then that showcased that they had some idea of how this was going to work out. It seemed like everybody was still on the fence. There wasn't a singular ideology heading into the real nitty gritty of this whole discussion. And that's the biggest thing here. The NCAA is its own blanket term, when in reality, all these conferences run individually. They are all governed individually. They all do their own things. And it's never been more apparent till today that they all do their own things and they all had their own ideas and their own way of thinking about how to combat this virus in midst of their football seasons. And unfortunately, they decided to take the wrong route here. They decided to try and fit a football season, like they tried to fit the regular season within a pandemic, when instead they should have been looking how to modify and change their way of thinking during the pandemic because of it. And instead, they're just trying to make the pandemic work for them, and that's not going to be successful. And it's been shown time and time again as weeks keep dwindling by that no matter how hard you try in this certain model that many leagues, many conferences are trying to accomplish, it's not going to work. As regular student body have come back to campus in most places, we're getting high case numbers. We're getting people going out. We're getting people getting tested, and we're seeing positive numbers climb up time and time again. And it is to the unfortunate realization that this shouldn't be a surprise, right? We shouldn't be surprised that this is happening. And that is concerning because of the first 2 points we talked about last segment, right? We don't know what the implications are for contracting the virus. We don't know what's going to happen to people's long-term health, right? And we know that transmission rates continue to rise. And we're bringing young people back on campus almost to the point to where some schools are saying, you know what, we can't do this anymore. And they're putting a halt on on-campus classes, and we're putting a halt on people being able to walk around on campuses freely. It is a big-time thing. Next bullet point. With the start of full contact practices and competitions, it became increasingly clear that the contact tracing and quarantining would risk frequent and significant disruptions to practice and competition calendar. Okay, here's the next thing. We all saw this happening, right? In early July, when we basically saw a bunch of teams, especially in the SEC, they got basically the go-ahead to start practice early in July. And it was, it was optional. You didn't have to do it. But, of course, people are going to go and try and practice to get the upper head and get ahead of, the competition and get started on the season. And you saw time and time again, X amount of players or staff have tested positive for COVID-19. They're quarantined for 14 days minimum. Same thing time and time again in different places. Then more and more people started to contract it at times. So we saw what happened at Clemson. We saw the numbers at LSU. We saw the numbers at Ohio State. We see and these are big time schools. And you would think, we see all the time testing. We have a lot of testing and it's going to help. Testing is just one part of the whole thing. Just because the NBA tests every day, basically, at all times, it doesn't mean that's the only thing that's keeping people, safe. Testing is just to find out if someone has it or not. But you have to have, things in place. You have to have rules in place. You have to have precautionary, systematic ways of stopping the spread of the virus. 1, 2, the contracting of the virus. And that's the thing. They don't have a way to stop contracting the virus. No one really does 100%. But there are ways to mitigate it. But the problem is we can't implement the ways that we've seen work so far into the college football atmosphere, into the college football world, because it's just asking for too much out of people, 1, who do not receive some sort of compensation for what they do, and it's going to lead into bad times. It's going to lead into the NCAA potentially losing their stronghold on people, on these athletes, on how people view these athletes, and on how the ecosystem and the way that college football has been operating for years and years and years and years, right? So they don't want to have to lose that, and they're already in a struggle battle for that, first and foremost. They're already struggling with that on Capitol Hill, right? They keep asking for senators to be able to work with them to make legislation for name, image, and likeness that have a lot of stipulations a lot of things that will not go well for the players in a lot of people's eyes when they read what they want done. And these congressmen and these senators, they keep on fighting against it, to keep on chastising the NCAA, to keep on talking about the NCAA, president and all this, that, and the third. And it gets into, showmanism, I like to call it, where they basically are just beating them down with words, and deservingly so in some aspects, but also this is really getting nowhere. It's just stall tactics. And every week you see something from that Capitol Hill meeting that's just like, well, what is this really accomplishing right now? And it just feels like this is like a tongue lashing rather than something productive. And I don't know when we'll ever get something productive, but what I do know is this is not going to help the NCAA in any sort of fashion in getting what they perceive as fair. So this is only going to accelerate this process of the breakdown of the current model of college sports and college athletics. And it is going to continue to go down this route if they don't figure something out, because the constant disruptions to practice, the competition calendar, everything stop, start. We don't know what's going to happen. We already see it in the MLB, and they get paid, right? That's the thing. No one's really stressing about what's going to happen to the players or what's going to happen with their season and, eligibility and stuff. They don't have to deal with eligibility. They don't have to deal with that because they're under contract. They have a union. The union doesn't really like, of course, the owners very much in baseball. And the commissioner sometimes seems like he doesn't actually like the sport anyway. And they still find a way to keep things afloat for now, right? I don't know how college sports keep things afloat for now with this sort of, model that they have, because there is no agreements. There is no, I signed this. Like, you can't make a player sign a waiver. You can't do that. Like, this is ridiculous. And the fact that it was even brought up at one point early on was just really, really incredible. Like, incredible to see that people brought out waivers or pledges, quote unquote, about what a player should and shouldn't be able to do. So that alone was just wild to me. But next point, accurate and widely available testing may help mitigate those concerns, but access to accurate tests is currently limited. So we're already seeing a lot of false positive tests going on in the NFL during training camps. I saw that Josh Allen had a false positive test, including a lot of Bills players on the same evening, same day during a training camp session. We're seeing a lot of false positive tests come in and out of these camps. And I don't think that means that people aren't doing their job properly or things like that. Sometimes it just, not all the systems are ready in an accurate way, and they want testing results quick, fast, and in a hurry. And it's hard to acquire that sort of technology, that sort of staffing, that sort of accuracy when it's really not available much elsewhere in the country. Like, people are waiting at least a week and a half before they get some results back, and it's getting bad. And not everybody has the means to get a test in the first place. So testing across the board nationally is still a big thing that has to still improve. And for college athletics to try and get accurate, meaningful, responsive testing every day, essentially, that they'll have to do it every practice day, it's going to be tough. And even then, are we even sure that we want to see that? Because it's going to be a big shocker to a lot of people when a lot of people test positive. And of course, that's helpful. You want to see if it's going to test positive, you rather know, so that way you can do your due diligence. But it's also going to showcase just how deep in the waters that this subsection of sports is going to get involved in. And finally, of course, the significant concerns also exist regarding the testing supply chain, generally for many of the institutions. So that is another thing. Everything is money. and supply and demand, simple economics, all that sort of stuff is going to affect what happens with the the turnarounds, how many that you can get, testing kits and things like that, how it's, administered, should I say, not administrated. It's a big time job. And, Kevin Warren laid it out on the line here in this letter. And I think this means this is it. Like, no more, the protests aren't going to work, I feel. I don't think this is going to help anymore. The protests, although admirable from players like, Justin Fields, who they don't really have to worry about getting drafted. They don't have to worry about what their draft stock looks like. It's about as high as it's going to get now without a season. I think he's still going to be drafted for sure next year, no matter what. And that's the big thing. I don't think he's doing it for himself. He's doing it for his brothers, for his other guys that play the sport who may need these seasons. And like, Joe Burrow said earlier last week, if he didn't have the season last year, who knows if he even gets drafted at all, let alone the first overall pick. So these players understand that a season can mean anything, could mean everything to what's happening. And it's admirable, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, we are not in a prepared state to have college football right now. And at least that's what the Big Ten commissioner believes, and that's what a lot of the athletic directors and people who make decisions at the head of the Big Ten also think as well. So that is the consensus, and that's how it looks like it's going to stay. And I don't think any petition or any sort of protest is going to stop them from continuing on looking towards to winter and or spring football. But we are going to take another break, and we're going to come back talking about some ACC, because some teams in the ACC are looking like they are trying to figure some things out. And we'll talk about that real quick. GSMC.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, GSMC College Football Nation, we're back, and we're going to be talking about UNC real quick. And they are trying to basically attempt to have a bubble, and it's pretty interesting how it worked out. So UNC had a bit of a shocker over the last week, and it wasn't really shocking of what happened. It's just how they ended up dealing with it, because a lot of university officials would not have done this, I don't believe, and now they're giving people some hope, but have caution. So we all know that why students must be invited back to campus, and SEC Commissioner, of course, mentioned it. Greg Sankey, he mentioned that, that's what we do in higher education. But, of course, that might be changing for some. And there's the big question that has been over college athletics for months is what will happen when students return? And many college athletic leaders feared the surge in students arriving on campus in college towns would end up having a lot of viral cases. And of course, we saw over the weekend that this is seeming like to be the case. So images over the weekend showed that people packed in nightclubs in Auburn and in the streets of Tuscaloosa and pulling together for block parties in Georgia. It's happening, right? And outbreaks are extreme enough at North Carolina and Notre Dame that just days into their fall semesters, all classes were moved to online. So UNC announced 130 positive cases over the weekend, and they suspended all in-person classes for the fall. Notre Dame's cases tripled within a single day on Tuesday to 147, and they put a 2-week pause on their in-campus classes. So the campus spikes are pretty bad. North Carolina has possibly paved the way to the most logical plan for universities seeking to compete in the fall 2020, and that is to play and train on campus without students. And this was once seen as something that can't really happen. It should be impossible. Even some conference commissioners basically throwing it away all entirely. UNC players are continuing to on-campus preparations for the 2020 season while students are attending digital classes, and many of them back home. Also, during a news conference on Tuesday, Coach Mark Brown even acknowledged the advantage of a campus without in-person classes, that most UNC players were already enrolled in online-only classes, which something that I already noted, that's typically what happens a lot with athletes anyway. But now with students not bustling about, the bubble enveloping the Tar Heels has a better shot at remaining intact. And he is stated saying it helps us create a better seal and a better bubble around our program, and that the NBA bubble model is working, and they've had very few distractions. So that helps, but also, that's a whole different reason why a few distractions are happening in the NBA bubble model. But a lot of college leaders have taken notice of what happened at Chapel Hill, and the Tar Heels have, and maybe accidentally acquired, what many college athletics believe is the only way to have a season. And it's a real live college bubble, the envy of the rest of the nation. So this is one athletic director who is not named, being stated. What they've done is created a bubble, and if there's a positive, some of the coaches are probably like, thank you. So, of course, this is going to come with some sort of problems, right? Medical experts and college administrators have long described the infusion of thousands of students into the college environments as a final, but maybe the biggest test, and it seems like it's not going well for most people. So this quasi-bubble that football teams have worked to secure this summer will undoubtedly pop. And while the spikes were expected, they aren't helping the prospect of the 2020 season. So although they all expected this to happen, it's not helping anything just because you were right on the expectation. Like, just because you expected it, what did you have in place to order to mitigate it? And it doesn't seem like much was done. And right now, this worry for UNC is a bit mitigated, and only for now, though. So the approach is a one-team experiment or a nationwide trend isn't clear yet. We don't know if this will end up branching out to other places, but the plan does have its problems, and it's ethical and optical dilemmas for most of the people in higher education, and confining campus activities to only athletics raises questions that we talked about a little bit earlier. So how do you have a football season without having students on campus? As Representative Donna Shalala, and former school president of Wisconsin and Miami, who now serves in the House. So Shalala isn't the only person who sees a problem with this. Of course, college football's own leaders have spoken out in the past over such arrangement. The Pac-12 commissioner Larry Scott was maybe most vocal about it and declared that in-person classes were a requirement for on-campus athletics. And he called it a gating issue, with several of his colleagues feeling the same. That includes Notre Dame athletic director Jack Swanberg, who, when asked about the issue in May, he said that students have to be on campus. Then 3 months later, his own university has shut down classes for 2 weeks while the football program continues training. So the big question is it right? Is it wrong? And it all really depends on who you ask. Now, some people are really, really worried about this, saying like Donna Lopiano, a longtime former college administrator now at the Drake's Group, who is organization of athletics, who defined the mission or of academics, not athletics, or organization of academics who defined their mission at defending academic integrity for the corrosive aspects of college sports. And from day one, she says, everybody was hiding behind, we would never have athletics if the campus is closed, but here we are doing it right out the box. And that is a big issue for a lot of people. And proponents of this plan view is that it's harmless measure to potentially save the industry from financial ruin. And a lot of people see it as another example of big money college executives treating athletes differently than they do regular students. And it's more proof that football players should get a cut for the NCAA's monetary pie. In the meantime, this is all unfolding during a pivotal time. Of course, we know NCAA leaders are clinging to the last little bits that they can of their amateur model in a fight at Capitol Hill over athlete compensation, encouraging Congress to pass a federal name, image, and likeness bill that will include a host of player restrictions. Ellen Zavian is a former NFL agent who is now a law professor at George Washington, believes that the NCAA's decades-old argument in legal fights is that we treat student athletes the same as students will fall apart with schools sponsoring on-campus athletics without in-person classes. And she states saying that have you ever heard the saying, your actions will be so deafening that I can't hear what you're saying. And this will be used to say that schools are treating athletes like essential employees and that they should be getting hazard pay. And that's the biggest takeaway for me, is that this is like playing 4D chess, and unfortunately you can't play chess against a pandemic because it's going to show you just how wrong you are each and every time, especially for the NCAA, where a model that needed to kind of be over and done with time and time again, that has been trying to hold on and cling to this thing for such a long time, has been stagnant on trying to make this work, hasn't really made any strides over the last few years. And now when it's basically the witching hour and is getting closer and closer to the time frame for decisions to be made, now they're trying to scramble and figure these things out, and scrambling and trying to figure things out is never the way to handle things. And now they're always in these tongue-lashing matches against Congress. And now, instead of just dealing with that on the forefront, on their backside, they have all this pressure from COVID-19 that is showcasing and unearthing all of these, real ethical questions going on in college athletics that a lot of people have been alluding to for quite some time. So all it took was a pandemic for people to start to see that maybe this college model does need some change. Maybe we need to see players actually start getting compensated, because for a long time, college athletics has not been treating athletes the same way as regular students, and it could be seen time and time again. Like, we can talk about how they haven't been treated the same way under the table or above the table, right? We know what happens under the table. We've heard it time and time again. We've seen repercussions. We've seen guys get Heisman's taken away. We've seen schools be suspended from, playoff play or anything like that time and time again for stuff done in the past, and still probably gets done now. Like, we see it in recruiting. We see it when it comes to getting people houses and cars and, jobs from family members and things like that. We see it all the time. Like, we heard about what was going on with Zion Williamson, and now he's in some sort of, a bit of a legal battle within former representation over what was going on. And that wasn't even through, Duke in particular. Regardless, it happens, right? And that's just under the table. And then above the table, we know that athletes aren't treated the same way. We know they have special recognition. We know they have different avenues on how they can handle things. We know what happens sometimes. And they're kind of like rock stars on campus, especially in Division I. If they go to a big time school, people are going to know who they are, what they look like. They're going to talk about what classes they take. It's all in this small social bubble that college is. And college football is 3 years of it, unlike, college basketball. So the magnitude is just at a different scale. And if you're a winner and if you're a guy who's charismatic or a guy who is very popular amongst people and amongst the national media, you are going to be talked about so much, right? It's going to be nonstop communication on it. So all that being said, the people aren't treated the same way, and they're not going to be treated the same way now. Like, that's just the bottom line. The NCAA is going to do what is best for the money, for the dollars, and doing what's best for the dollars is having these athletes come in to the campus with nobody else around and still practice. And it doesn't matter if the athletes are going to say, I still want to play, and they're going to continue to play with or without students on campus. It's just the principle of the fact that they are getting treated differently, and that's just not how it's supposed to be. If all other students can't come on campus, that means, what does that mean for students? Athletes, right? Student, athlete. Are they students anymore? What is happening here? And for this reason and others, college athletic officials and medical experts have to spend most of the summer detailing the impracticality of a college bubble. It's virtually implausible, a lot of people say. So you can't have a bubble college athletes or cocoon them away like the pros, says Amish Aldalja, and an infectious disease physician who sits on the board for the NCAA COVID-19 adversary panel, right? And it's easier to endure or endeavor to sequester paid athletes for months as opposed to unpaid amateurs who exist in college campuses in the middle of college towns, both teeming with expectations. And as recent student behavior has shown, of course, college-age people are prone to make less prudent decisions than those at the pro level. But above all, a bubble is implausible in college for one reason. When the students all come back to campus, there is no bubble because they have to go to class. And a team doctor told, Sports Illustrated this summer that if they're going to move forward and say that they're student athletes, then they have to go to class. And what if there's no in-person classes? Some question why a campus is not safe enough for a general student body, but is safe enough for athletes. Amy Perko is an executive director of the Knight Commission, a longstanding independent group that promotes reforms that support the educational mission of college sports. While the Knight Commission maintains a policy against commenting on specific institutions, the overarching principle is to treat college athletes the same way the university treats students, says. And in this case, the same would apply unless there is some compelling reason to act differently. And those arguing for a UNC-like bubble have their reasons, of course. So athletes represent a fraction of the student body. Among major conference schools, UNC has one of the highest percentage of total athletes, about 850. So its general students are usually 30,000, and still stands at about 2.8%. And that small group of athletes is receiving top-class medical care, including surveillance, COVID-19 testing, and cardiac screening. In rationalizing the move, one ACC administrator suggested the athletes aren't the only ones potentially remaining on campus. International students are there as well, along with others whose coursework warrants the use of on-campus facilities. So there's a lot of people talking from different sides about this whole thing, but all in all, this is very, very interesting to see what happens because of it. And we're going to stay tuned here at GSMC. We're going to take our final break here and come back finishing out the podcast talking about all the remaining conferences moving forward playing college football in 2020 this year for the fall. This is the GSMC.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we're back here, GSMC College Football Nation, and just before we get back into the college football atmosphere, I just had to see Luka Doncic hit the game winner. What a shot right there, brother. Let me tell you this. That boy is cold. It's a cold brother right there, man. He looked at that whole team, the Clippers, and said, I call game. Anyway, we got to talk about some college football shenanigans to end off the podcast. And we have to talk about the ACC. So the ACC and a bunch of other conferences, for that matter, are still deciding to play college football. So some people call them the stubborn six, the steadfast six, the patient six, but they represent the last hopes of having a fall college football season. And midway through August, 6 of the 10 FBS conferences plan to move forward with having a fall 2020 football season. So that's the SEC, Big 12, ACC, AAC, Sun Belt, and Conference USA. And of course, we know 4 of their brethren sidelined themselves. The 6 leagues aren't out of the woods just yet. And a lot are having obstacles ruin their paths, including one of the biggest tests of the pandemic, and thousands of students returning to campuses across the country. So, of course, we just talked about UNC shutting down in-person classes last Monday due to the outbreak in its first week of class. And the athletic director or the athletic department issued a statement saying that it intends to continue with its sports teams for now. So before the kickoff is 16 days away, Southern Miss is set to host South Alabama in the earliest scheduled game of this sure-to-be weird season. And while the 6 leagues barrel towards their seasons, each is working independently. And they've got their own commissioner who oversees a board of presidents and chancellors and the key group of decision makers that more times than not listens to recommendations from their athletic directors. And roughly 2 weeks shy away from kickoff. And here are all their situations. So Conference USA membership situation is about Old Dominion, and Conference USA's Eastern Division last week became the first member of the conference to bail on a season despite its own conference moving forward. FIU and Rice have both announced a delay to the start of their seasons. So Conference USA presidents met last week with no real decision out of the call except to keep the path for the season to continue. And they heard from their medical board, specifically getting an update on the hot topic right now in college athletics, which is lingering heart issues in athletes who have recovered from COVID-19. So Conference USA athletic directors met each Monday and Thursday, and it isn't clear when the next meeting among the presidents will happen. At some point, potentially this week, the league is expected to release a new schedule that recognizes ODU's absence and could finalize in-season testing protocols. And the outlook for the fall 2020 season for them is like many Group of 5 conferences and somewhat connected to its Power 5 conference neighbors. In Conference USA's case, that'd be the ACC and SEC. As long as those two are still marching forward, it feels like Conference USA will be able to be right behind them. Conference USA programs still have 4 guaranteed games on the schedule, and those contests, along with the CFP distribution deal, or money rather, make it worthwhile financially to have a season. That said, the conference is expected to implement a similar in-season testing protocol with its Power 5 brethren, and that means steep prices for programs that have budgets that are 1/10 of the major colleges. And they said that right now all systems are a go and everything is subject to change, but they are in football mode, and that's a conference source. The Sun Belt Conference, then unseen, no schools have backed out of the season just yet, and the league has announced that it plans to play the normal 8 conference games, and its teams are allowed to play up to 4 non-conference opponents. And what's in store for this week is that they are scheduled to have a joint call with athletic directors on Wednesday, though there's no reason to think that any significant decision will emerge from it. And the outlook is that the Sun Belt feels attached to the SEC, and if the SEC leaps from a bridge, expect the Sun Belt to follow it, and the Sun Belt SEC relationship is similar to other Group of 5, Power 5 connections such as Mountain West, Pac-12, and the MAC in the Big Ten. And these conferences are often in lockstep with one another, and the little brother following the older brother's path. That said, the Sun Belt's number of guaranteed games against the Power Five continues to shrink. And they said that it's worth it for us to play a season, and if we don't have a season at all, they don't believe that the game, or nor do they have the college football money, or the college football playoff, the money distributed through the FBS. So that's another source. The SEC, so everyone is on board to continue pursuing a 2020 fall season, and while there have been some reported outbreaks in several schools, none of them have paused or suspended workouts this summer, and many of their COVID numbers are leveling off after having their players back for 2 months. And of all the leagues, SEC has been the most public about its desire to play in the fall, with coaches and administrators to the conference office. And the league settled on 10-game conference-only schedule with a few weeks ago, and also announced the schedule Monday night. And the SEC presidents have a standing call each Thursday, and as of Monday night, no impromptu call was scheduled like last week when the SEC leaders met in light of the Big Ten and Pac-12 news. And the outlook is, as mentioned above, the league is more committed to playing a 2020 fall season more than any other, and it's not difficult to see why. The SEC slogan is, "It just means more," and it applies in this situation. College football's importance to the South is certainly a motivating factor for the conference, and it should be noted that SEC's medical advisory panel has not approved for the conference to play a season yet. And for now, the league's medical experts have only cleared teams to practice, and SEC squads started fall camp Monday. SEC has said from a conference source is that we're trying to create a runway to get this thing off the ground, and the presidents want to keep moving forward until we can't move forward anymore. So they are going to run till the treads come off the tires, basically. So don't expect anything too crazy or anything different from something like that. The Big 12, so their membership situation is that everyone is proceeding with plans to play, with most of the league now plotting 25% attendance for home games after many were originally hoping for double that. Oklahoma just lost star running back Kennedy Brooks, who opted out, and which makes the transfer of Trey Sermon to Ohio State in the spring a double painful loss. And having low numbers all summer, the Sooners were hit with uptick in positive cases after giving the team a week off from practice. So how they got here, of course, the Big 12 is the league that saved fall football for now, right? When conference presidents and athletic directors hear what they wanted to hear from medical experts regarding the virus and related issues, they decided last week that to keep pressing on, and they gave the ACC the signal it needed to do the same, and then in turn kept the SEC in the fold. So what's in store for this week is that the Big 12 presidents have previously scheduled call Monday to discuss the season, with no real significant news resulting from the call. So athletic directors will convene later this week, and with non-conference games scheduled to start September 12th, the season is coming into sharper focus. But last week, the state of Kansas added a required 14-day quarantine to anyone who will attend a mass gathering involved attendance of more than 500 people outside the state, a rule that would create problems for both Kansas and Kansas State as their opponents if it stays on the books. They said that when the medical people got all the presidents on the same page, it cleared up a lot of things for them, and we're going to be ready to proceed after that. Then we have the ACC, so everyone is proceeding with practice, but the wide variance in geography corresponds with the wide variance in outlooks. In the Northeast, Boston College and Syracuse are both in states that have travel restrictions on the books, and the ACC waited to gauge the commitment level of the Big 12 last week before making its own commitment to stay in the game alongside the SEC. And with a majority of Power 5 leagues still going forward, the ACC was comfortable with the strength in numbers. And I do believe you can sufficiently mitigate the risk of bringing COVID into the football field, or onto the football field, into the training room at a level that is no different than living as a student on campus, said Dr. Cameron Wolfe of Duke, who chairs the ACC Medical Advisory Team. He told Sports Business Daily. So there is a regular Wednesday president's meeting, of course, plus an array of league calls from athletic staffers, and there are expected updates from each school on how the return of students on campus has been going. North Carolina's situation in particular will likely be a topic of conversation. And this is the most fickle of the 3 Power 5 conferences still planning to play. So any further Carolina-level disruptions among the student body could be a challenge to the ACC's willingness to keep going. And for now, ACC kickoff is set for September 10th with UAB visiting Miami, and ACC format calls for 10 league games and 1 non-conference opponent, and that game must be played within the home state of ACC team. And all non-conference opponents have been set except for Clemson's, which is expected to be the Citadel. Both Syracuse and North Carolina State have voiced testing concerns regarding non-league opponent Liberty. And with Notre Dame playing a full ACC slate this time, the season takes an added luster. And with that said, if anything, you can argue that it puts their football team in a safer environment. As a league source about UNC going to online classes only, reducing on-campus student interaction. The AAC schools are all in for now. So the AAC presidents last week, they met and agreed to continue the progress toward the 2020 season, and they announced that scheduling philosophy, 8 conference games plus as many as 4 non-conference games. Meanwhile, Tulsa has paused workouts after 8 players tested positive and 8 more are quarantined via contact tracing. So what's in store for this week is that AAC presidents are meeting Tuesday in a joint call with athletic directors, and the group is expected to hear a briefing from the medical panel in light of concerns raised last week from the Big Ten and Pac-12, specifically regarding COVID-19's impact on the heart. So the outlook on 2020 fall for this league is that the presidents have some health concerns after the Big Ten and Pac-12 bailed, and those concerns will be addressed during the medical briefing on Tuesday. Administrators often, or around the league, don't necessarily expect a vote to determination from the meeting, but the call is an important step to the critical time. The AAC opens the season September 5th, and the AAC likes to call itself the 6th conference in the Power 6 as a sign of strength. So many officials around the league feel like the AAC will hang around as long as the Power 5 conferences do. So those are the situations for your 6 conferences, man, and see what everybody else has got going on. So it's definitely going to be big time. It's going to be challenges going around, and, we got to stay locked in, stay tuned in, because you never know who is going to continue to push the gas on this whole thing and who is going to, decide to put their chips on the table, try to put their cards down and fold. So we'll be locked in right here with you to keep you up to date. But this is the GSMC College Football Podcast for today. I'd like to thank you all for listening and staying tuned and rocking with us. So don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast if you liked it. And if you didn't like it, rate it anyway. Leave a review. Everything helps. Don't forget to follow us on social media, our Facebook and our Twitter, GSMC College Football. And we'll be back, I'll be back with you guys, of course, next Monday as we see what happens in about a week or so. So for the GSMC College Football Podcast, this is Ethan, and I'll see you all next week. Peace out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.